It's Tuesday, 29th of April 25, and last week John Swinney had his quote summit, and I can't remember what the name of it is for, but he announced it around about the early March that he was having a summit last week in April. And in March he said, someone asked him, is reform the right far? And he said yes. But then when they had the summit last week, I think they talked for 4 hours. It was meant to be a sort of council, a committee of Civil Scotland or something, Civic Scotland, who he's choosing to attend. And apparently the Tories didn't attend, which was good, very sensible of them. Reform didn't get asked, so that's good. But yeah, at this time he didn't mention reform at this thing, and I think it's because there's been a few council elections since then, by-elections, and there was one in particular in North East Glasgow, which I take to be Springburn. I could be wrong. And Reform get 23% in it. I think they were second. And so, really, if their heartlands go, SNP Labour heartlands, it's the same people voting between the parties at each election. They probably thought they were untouchable. Reform had no chance there. But that council election shown that, personally, I think all of them are going to switch. All the traditional Labour SNP voters are going to switch to Reform as an Overton window shift on one issue, basically voting on one issue. And it is just weird seeing this summit because I've watched it already, and everyone seemed pessimistic, as if they were doomed, basically. I'm talking about them, personally, their view on this issue, and probably themselves in politics. They all seemed dejected, which was really surprising to me, because I thought it was going to be, you look at it and they were going to be a bit of a ado and basically say that traditional Labour SNP Scots, you can't vote Reform or we will call you a word. I thought it was going to be like that, but actually it turned out they were just totally downcast, and they were being very, very subtle in what they were saying, And I'll just show you a few bits. It's at 1.9 speed, but
to engage in the start of a conversation about how we act emphatically to protect our democratic system. Because what I don't want to find myself in is I don't want to find myself in some years to come regretting that I have not taken a stand on the threats that we face. Whether that's about the threats of disinformation in our debate, whether that's the threats to participation in our politics because people find the climate and the culture off-putting, or whether it's about the fact that we don't fundamentally stand up against sentiments and initiatives and actions that are fundamentally at odds with how I think Scottish society wants to proceed, so that we actually tackle the fundamental issues of inequality, of intolerance, of prejudice, of disrespect in our society. So I'm not...
I just find it so insulting, it's just absolutely the opposite. I think it's the opposite. They're called the Scottish National Party, but to me they seem to be, I can't even say what they want for the country on this issue, for the traditional voters, but really I think for the voters, SNP voters, you should be voting Reform, basically, really, to try and save your country, really.
I'm not for a moment going to say that today is the end of the process. Today is the start of the process, and it opens up that opportunities for us to take that forward. So, Anna, please.
Can I first of all say that I welcome the contributions people made this morning. It was important to hear from charities, businesses, members of different faith groups, and I think there is the issue of prejudice and hate and that going beyond party politics and us showing a united front against all forms.
Yeah, and this is interesting because there's a video of him going around at the moment. There was some sort of meeting indoors of a community, what he would regard as community, and he was referring to them as he was referring to them as a foreign people. He wasn't actually saying that, he was actually saying the word for the country, or what you call the citizens there. I remind him that he's Scottish, and sometimes he was saying South Asian, so he would go between that. And then there was another, apparently they had some sort of protest, his community in George Square, and his dad appeared there, who was the first Muslim MP of Britain. He represented some area that's very changed over the last decades, but at that time, when he got elected in 87, it was still very traditional Scots, and they kindly elected him. And there's a story behind that, yeah. And so he was 87, he was still there to 2010, but in 2009 he got involved with apparently some young Glasgow lady, 17 years old, was taken to Pakistan on holiday and ended up married, which she wasn't expecting. So he didn't, nothing happened for a while, but then he got involved. I'm presuming the lady then either didn't get married or whatever, but for some reason he decided he wasn't going to stand in 2010. So then you could be thinking, okay, 23 years, maybe he's not interested in politics anymore. But then in 2014 he turns up running for election in Pakistan as a governor, which he wins under the party, the ruling party. He then switches to, I think he switched to Sadiq Khan's party, which some see as a Trump-like party. When that started rising, I think he won the election again. So for some reason, and to do that he had to renounce his British citizenship, so he's no longer a British citizen. But here he was in George Square. Oh no, I forgot. No, I've posted that. Here he was in George Square, and he was saying things like, "We're going to make saying bad things about our profit illegal all over the world, in the EU and United Nations, etc." You know, it wasn't very Labour-like, I would say. And also Annis's things he was saying weren't very Labour-like. They were very ethnic, I thought, you know, very pure to do with that ethnicity. So, although he did start saying South Asian at some point, so he did, that was pretty inclusive of them, though. Quite strictly inclusive, you know, not that inclusive. But yeah, so this is what's been going on since then. So this is just, I don't know.
All forms of prejudice and hate in our society. But if we are going to challenge disenfranchisement and division in our politics, then we have to address government failure. And we also have to address the fact that what today can't be allowed to look like is somehow the Scottish establishment coming together to talk.
So this is a Scottish Labour leader talking, you know, the good people of Scotland have elected him. Well, I think it's maybe his politicians, maybe his party, which is probably still a majority of sort of thing at the moment. And they've kindly voted him in. And this is the kind of thing he's saying to his own community. We're no longer going to be a bank vote. He's calling himself, and he's talking about Labour there, because that's how they're supposed to vote at the moment. I don't know whether he's saying that because he thinks his own community is going to vote an identity candidate, or if it's the way he feels about Labour. I don't know, but it didn't sound very nice. It sounded like sort of a threat the way he was saying it, you know. But anyway.
To talk to itself about itself and actually not doing the meaningful things that make a difference to people's lives. And the harsh reality is that people across our society feel as if government doesn't work for them, the economy doesn't work for them, public services don't work for them, and different institutions don't work for them. And fundamentally, unless we address those challenges, we will continue to see people push towards divisive rhetoric and divisive...
I mean, that's totally correct, but actually the electoral system doesn't work for us, you know, the party system, the representative system. We actually need, at least in Scotland, we've got proportional representation, and I think that's what they're really worried about, because Reform are really going to make an inroad. They're about 15% at the moment in the polls in Scotland. I mean, personally, I think that's going to go 30-40%. Labour and SNP will vanish, and Lib Dems and Greens. Greens may be kept propped up by people who are concerned about a war 2,000 miles away, which is also maybe 1,000 miles away from where they have a flag from. They may have two flags. They may have the flag of that country, plus where they regard a place very dear to them. Whether they've got a Scottish flag, I don't know. But yeah, so it's just insult after insult here, really.
Divisive political parties. So yes, open democracy means disagreement, debate, but we can't allow that to get into dislike and hatred. But fundamentally, if we're going to challenge this, we've got to improve people's lives.
Can I come in?
Please, Archers.
Thank you, yes. I think we talked a lot about disaffection and the fact that lots of people are not voting anymore and people are moving to the extremes. And in large part that's because I think to re-engage people...
They're not moving to extremes, they're moving to common sense. I mean, this whole thing's been going on 75 years. It's been a mistake, and because the Scottish people, the British people are so nice, it's been allowed to happen, and now it's got to a situation where, I mean, these politicians think we're heading for utopia, but we're not allowed to consider that we're actually heading for chaos. They won't even let us think that. I'm not even talking about whether you dislike people. It's not about that. It's whether you think we're heading for total chaos, you know. But they're haven't even considered that. You may get arrested and jailed for that. Whereas if you think it's going to be utopia, you could become the leader of any of these parties, you know.
People, you need to govern well, and they don't feel governed well either in Scotland or in London. And more to the point, I think that there is this sort of view that the last thing this should be is appear like a new ivory tower, which is, yes, a further
This is a Scottish Lib Dem leader.
disconnect from those people who feel estranged. I mean, that would just be consolidating their worldview. I made the point in the discussion this afternoon that I think we should, as a next step, seek to harness the views of those who have become estranged from politics or who are attracted by the extremes, to understand what has gone wrong for them. Why is the status quo not working for them? What is the failure of the Scottish Government or the Parliament?
I mean, all this is because Scots are voting reform. They thought they weren't going to vote reform. I mean, the general election reform get 8% of the vote, which was probably a surprise to them. But, you know, before that, they thought reform wasn't even someone you could pick in the YouGov poll, you know what I mean? It was 4 parties. If you wanted to vote reform, you had to go to the next page. You had to select other and go to the next page. And I know this because I've done the polls. I mean, I voted UKIP at the 2019 election, you know. I'm previously Labour, Green, Lib Dems, SNP. I voted for all of them. I voted for yes at the referendum. But I can see how what's going to happen now in reform, even though they're very weak on this issue. They're getting better now, but they're an Overton party, Overton window protest party vote, and I think everyone in Scotland who's been around a while is going to vote for them eventually.
Or the Parliament or the council that serves them, what has let them down, and how do we fix it? Because I think it's only by governing well, by reconnecting with them, by being seen in their communities, that they can have a tangible route to their elected representatives, that can we reconnect them. So yeah, this is a start of the process. We've engaged in good faith, but it's not been about locking people out.
Okay, James.
I mean, for me, the surprise is that they're wondering why people aren't voting, you know, because 1, people aren't voting, 2, people are voting reform. So to me, the surprise is that they're bothered about people aren't voting, you know, because as long as people aren't voting, like Labour, Keir Starmer, get 2/3 of the MPs, they get a smaller percent of the vote than Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, which Keir refers to as the low point. They get less votes than Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, but you get 2/3 of the majority of MPs, and he's taken that. He's acting as if he's got the biggest mandate ever for a thingy, but I think he's got the weakest mandate ever, and I think Labour might actually have to call a general election within the next year or two, because it'll be untenable. They're already down at like 22% in the polls. I don't know who's voting for them. Personally, I think if you get under 20% in the polls for a long time, you should have to call a general election, you know, but Keir Starmer's not the type of guy that's going to do that.
James Cook.
Thank you, First Minister. I mean, one of the areas of perhaps the deepest contention in Scottish politics recently has been the issue of gender. I wonder if I could just ask all the panel a simple yes or no question, which is, in your view, are trans women women? I don't know if we could start with Ms. Regan, maybe.
Sure, thank you. Well, as we've heard from the Supreme Court last week in that absolute landmark ruling, trans women are not legally women, and that has large implications right.
See, this is the Alba lady who used to be in the SNP, and she left cause of this, but she's a outlier. Personally, I don't think this is an issue. It might be an issue because it's sort of symmetrical with the one issue. I think it's important because it's a sort of thing that our political parties, it was a very important issue, and you could say that maybe newcomers have an opposite view to it. I don't know, you can't think me, but judging by a UN index on women's rights and LGBTQ plus and that, you would say, well, these countries seem to be the opposite of what these are thinking. So to me, it's a sort of elite, Scottish elite, current Scottish elite issue tied in with the other issue because they feel the same way with both of them, whereas the people are probably anxious about both these issues, and recently we've had a chance to reject them on that issue, especially through the Supreme Court, and now they're wondering if the other issue, which is the main issue in my opinion, the only issue, they're going to lose that as well because of reform. And yes, they are. And actually this, I think the first sign of this was the Irish referendum they had. Was it last year, last March, where that Taoiseach had an issue where it was a backdoor. They were to approve their view on this gender issue and also the other issue that we can't speak about. And the Irish rejected them, 75% I think it was. And the Prime Minister resigned, I think a month later or something, Nicola Sturgeon resigned as well. And I think that they're saying, because they're going to lose on this issue, they're also going to lose on the other issue. Because the other two issues are sort of elite things that the elite are pushing through, but the people don't want it, really. So traditional people, you know.
Right across the public and the third sector in Scotland. My view on this is that I was very disappointed yesterday with what...
To me, I'm not so bothered about this issue. I see it, but I'm trying to say that these elites see it as a sort of, for them it's a very sort of supreme issue, I would say, when you judge the UN index of how others feel, other countries feel on this, that are coming to live in Scotland, you know.
What the government set out in their statement, because I still felt that the people that had risked so much of their reputations, and I would obviously include people in Scotland, but there are many other women and some men that have done that, you know, have put a lot on the line for this, are still being patronised.
I presume the camera can't swing any further to the right.
And are still being talked down to as if somehow we weren't, you know, the ones who were right about this thing all along. The government need to take leadership on this now. They can't wait any longer. Women are being impacted on this up and down the country. You know, the best example of that recently obviously is the Sandy Peggy case in Fife. These cases shouldn't be continuing, and the government need to draw a line in the sand now. I believe we need to apologise to the women of Scotland for what has gone on and the nonsense that has been perpetuated onto the country, so that we're able to rebuild that, and then we can continue to, I think maybe perhaps reset the relationship. I think this has had a damaging effect on the institutions of Scotland, particularly the government, but also the Parliament as well.
I think I don't think we've got the space for us all to answer the question. There'll be plenty of opportunities for Patrick.
I think one word of balance might be helpful. My short answer to your initial question is yes, but it's not difficult for you to find issues that there'll be political disagreement about on a whole range of different issues on the people on this panel and beyond. The issue that's brought us here together is far more important than that, far more profound than that. And Britain...
I think this is him talking about reform. You know, he's not mentioning them. So Scottish people aren't even allowed to think of reform, you know. That's a joke. I mean,
many of the people who took part in today's discussions talked about the way in which the marginalisation and stigmatisation of individual minority groups, many of whom feel deeply afraid at the moment because of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, that can lead to even worse. And we see that in the US, where...
what's happening in the last couple of weeks? I don't know. Maybe they're talking about Trump. I don't know. But
you know, what began in many ways as demonising very small marginalised minorities has become a full-on...
I mean, I think they're talking about the polls, basically. Scottish voters are voting reform, basically.
Ideological purge. The threat to our democracy goes far beyond any one particular issue, and it goes beyond the disagreements that we might have amongst this group about those particular political issues. The threat to our
I mean, they're talking about voting for reform as a threat to democracy. How is it? If that's what people are voting for.
Democracy is that we end up in this country with something every bit as dangerous as what is happening in the US at the moment, and that's what should unite us.
Okay, for my part, I accept the statement was given yesterday to Parliament by the Social...
I mean, the cheek of them. I mean, this is happening all over Europe. People are, because of this one issue, people are voting for very right parties, or seen to be right parties, because of this one issue. But this is because you are all forcing us to realise.
The Social Justice Secretary, which represents my position, the government's position, that we accept unreservedly the Supreme Court judgment, and as a consequence of that, we have actions to take in relation to the design of regulation, which will have to take place in dialogue with the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which we will take forward. So we'll take Tony Maguire, please.
Well, First Minister, I'd just like to ask yourself, I guess, this summit has been touted as a democratic conference to safeguard Scotland's democratic values.
Also, I find it interesting you've got Anna Sarwar there, but apart from that, it looks very traditional Scots, you know, and I think this is maybe them trying to say to traditional Scottish SNP Labour voters, you can't vote reform, look at us, you know, because it has looked very different. It's maybe a committee of Civic Scotland, which I think would look very different now, especially Glasgow. So you would have thought it would be a whole diverse range of leaders. But instead it all seems to be the same, apart from Anna Sarwar. I think there's one other there, but apart from that, it's meant to look like old Scotland, basically, and tell you can't vote reform. Well, I'm telling you, you should vote reform. Really.
Values. Do you think that's still upheld, even though one party reform in this case was not invited to the table, and is that still retain its democratic nature?
Well, what I decided to do when I set out this idea, Tony, was to invite all the current parliamentary parties, and they were all invited, and I'm grateful to my colleagues who have come. It's a matter of regret to me that Russell Finlay decided not to come as leader of the Scottish Conservatives. I think it would have helped to draw that, different dimensions to the conversation had he been here, but that's a matter entirely for Russell. So I think it's important that we lead that conversation from within the parliamentary parties, but that we also recognise the importance of engaging with communities. So the discussion is not just start and stop inside this room, it has got to be taken outside, which is why I was drawn together the voices that I've drawn together to try to have this important discussion. Please,
just to supplement that point is, I think one of the lessons we can learn from other parts of the world is not focusing on the big personality or a party brand, but actually issues that underlie why people feel a sense of disenfranchisement and why they then go towards divisive political parties. And that's what...
I mean, it is a bit ironic because I've got that guy, is it Imran Khan in Pakistan. A lot of times, a British community protest outside Jemima Khan's house, or whatever her name is, Jemima Goldsmith, because she was married to him once. They go out and protest in favour of Imran Khan, who's seen as a populist Trump thingy, and his dad switched from the sort of Tory Pakistan party as a governor to Imran Khan's party, because he could see that that was populist. That's who people were voting for. So it is ironic to hear him get on about Trump and that, and about individuals and that, you know.
That's what I'm interested in. That's what many people that were here this morning were interested in, is how do you address the underlying inequalities around housing, around public service, around the economy, that makes people give up on institutions and therefore push towards those kind of divisive politics and politicians.
Okay, Alan Smith.
Thank you. If we just bring Ros into the conversation, we spoke yesterday about the summit, and you said your main concern was all of this becoming some sort of political football, given everything that had been said in the run-up to the summit, and warning that centrist parties were essentially in the last chance saloon in tackling some of these threats. I wonder if anything from today has maybe changed your concerns, or if those concerns still exist.
Well, those concerns definitely still exist, Alan, but I do feel some hope. I feel that today's discussion was a very, very
I don't know who she is, a random woman, I would call her.
important discussion. It was an important conversation that took place in the room because...
And plus she's specially chosen maybe because of the way she looks, you know, so that Scottish voters won't vote reform, you know, they'll say, look at us, like Scotland hasn't changed.
People were recognising that here in Scotland we have a problem, and we have a deep problem. It's a threat to our democracy. We are seeing rising...
They're all talking about this and they're not telling you what the problem is. It's comical.
Attacks on vulnerable groups. We're seeing rising amount of dialogue and extreme right-wing ideology that is influencing our communities, and we are seeing a situation that is a real threat to our society and could end in a very, very dark place. And so it's a bit like standing up and saying I am an alcoholic. That, you know, it's important.
A very dark place by voting Nigel Farage. I mean, how is that a dark place, you know?
That we had that conversation, that we acknowledged that something is wrong, and that people are feeling deeply disenfranchised. And it was a very wide-ranging conversation. It identified a lot of the issues that are affecting people. We talked about, you know, so the breakdown of community, the lack of role models for young people. We talked about the lack of resources to support people in our most disenfranchised communities, the need to redistribute wealth more effectively. A whole range of issues came up, but we also talked about the very sophisticated campaigning and bad actors out there at a global level who are operating to ensure that disenfranchised communities, that people that are finding it hard to cope with their standard of living, are receiving some really negative messaging. So there are people out there who are trying to take advantage of the economic situation that people are in, and the people who are in that situation, they're not stupid, but they are very much angry, they're feeling disenfranchised, they're feeling ignored for very good reasons. So there was a bit of humility in the...
I mean, here she's saying she understands why they're acting this way. You don't, obviously, because you're I don't know, it's just so insulting.
I felt, and a recognition by the politicians that more needs to be done to make a material difference to people's lives, but also a recognition that we've got to start calling out this issue. You know, there are too many influences out there that are about let's punch down on the most vulnerable groups, and there is not enough recognition that actually the people that are responsible for a lot of the exploitation that people are feeling is actually the billionaire class in our society. So, you know, it was a very wide-ranging discussion. I was pleased to see it taking place.
I mean, I've said many times, to me, we need the Swiss referendum, the Swiss democratic system. It's the only democratic system I can think of. It's based on direct democracy, quarterly referendums, petition referendums, voting in one issue. You know, you need to remove the party hamper system, the representative system, first past the post. I mean, proportional representation is a start, but it's only a start. It's no longer can it be people deciding things. It's got to be direct democracy as much as possible.
I don't think any of us should be blind to the rise of authoritarianism across the world.
And here's a very rare thing: it's a Canadian Scot, and I suppose she's a good look for this panel, you know, to say to the traditional Scots, you can't vote reform, basically, you know. Look, Scotland hasn't changed.
Fascist ideologies, what's happening in America to human rights, deportations without due process is terrifying. We do need to protect Scottish democracy to make sure that people's human rights are respected, and part of that is making sure that everyone in Scotland is engaged in politics and doesn't feel that politics is being done to them from a distance. So some of the conversation today was really practical. It was about things about...
Which is exactly what's happening, you know. They did push through that, they tried to push through that thing where the supermarkets would collect, what was it, glass bottles or something, but personally I was in favour of it, but Humza Yousaf scrapped it, you know. When I say in favour of it, I thought, yeah, okay, and a lot of them had already built their things to take the bottles, but Humza Yousaf scrapped it as a populist thing, it seems to me, but he didn't last very long.
Things about how do we get politics closer to the people? Do we need smaller councils? Do we need people to be able to feel more engaged in that decision making? And has the amount of money that's going into elections to sway elections gone too far? Are billionaires effectively across the world able to buy elections? Where has one person, one vote gone? And re-establishing that so people feel their vote matters.
I mean, it doesn't help that you only get to vote every 5 years. I mean, in Scotland we used to get to vote every 4 years with the new Holyrood thingy, but SNP changed that to every 5 years. So is getting to vote every 5 years, as for a party hamper, a lot of things that you don't want, a lot of things that they won't say they're going to do, but they do. I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer had the winter allowance thing scrapping that. I don't think he had that in his manifesto, did he? He might have, I don't know, but is that a good electoral system?
Matters that they're being, that when they know who their councillor is and they know how their tax money is being spent, re-establishing that is fundamental to making our democracy work better. And I was very happy to hear these sorts of practical suggestions being discussed today.
If I may just briefly on the suggestions, I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is because I think the Scottish Government characterised this to me and some of the solutions.
I mean, personally, I used to watch Holyrood First Minister's questions all the time, but I've not watched it for a while now because I find it irrelevant, really, you know. None of them represent me at all. And there's one issue that's a crisis, and none of them, all of them want it, because they say it's going to be utopia, you know. But I mean, what happened to them with wokeness is that's sort of been, they've been hitting the flank on this issue, and they can see what's coming, basically.
Solutions we discussed are inherently Liberal Democrat solutions around transparency, decentralisation, empowering people, re-engaging communities. And
well, like I say, I'm surprised at how dejected they are, you know, how defeatist they are. They feel that they're defeated already.
And I think it was very heartening to see, I think, the cross-section of society signing up to those. This is a direction of travel I welcome from the government. I hope we can stick to it. But yeah, like I said at the start, this should only be a start. If it's not a start, if this is the entirety of it, it's an ivory tower that consolidates that disconnect that people feel.
Okay,
exactly. Exactly what's wrong.
Thank you very much. Given everything you've said so far, and the talk about polarisation, the talk about the public discourse being soured, I wonder if you think we'll ever hear a First Minister or a leading politician ever tell parts of the Scottish society again that their views on anything are not valid and that there should be no debate about anything, whether or not you're worried that that's maybe what has led to a...
I mean, it seems that even the journalists are scared to mention reform, you know. It should have been the first question, is why haven't you mentioned reform?
Souring of discourse. And can I also, just ask you, Mr Swinney, if you've ever discussed any of your issues around the far rights and those threats in particular with the Prime Minister, because we know he has said today that he's concerned about the use of St George's Cross by far right groups and how they need to sort of win back control over that particular flag. If you had any thoughts on that.
I can't. In general, the Prime Minister and I talk about kind of a wide variety of political trends. Let me say that. So we will have aired the unease that we have about.
Yeah, trends, exactly. People voting reform democratically. Yeah.
Some of these issues in society, but we haven't had a specific formal discussion about that point. But in the goodwill of the conversation that goes on between the Prime Minister and I, we will have touched on that carefully. In relation to your substantive question, Gina, I have tried, since I became First Minister just nearly a year ago, to take an approach which engages substantially with people about the issues about which they're concerned and about which there are different and distinctive opinions. I will address people's opinions. I might not agree with them. I'll set out my stance, and that will be the approach that I take. But I'll do that in a respectful fashion. I think that's been part of what I promised I would do to Parliament. When I became First Minister a year ago, I promised Parliament I would be respectful in the way I took forward debate, and I'm doing my best to live up to that. Now, people probably will think that, like most other things, I should be doing other things, and I should be doing more of that, but my endeavour is to do exactly that, and I'll make every effort to ensure that's the case in the future. Please.
I think, looking beyond just the last few months, I think if you look at the last decade of our general political discourse, I think there has been, for some people out there, the feeling that there's a delegitimisation of their views, or somehow they can speak for Scotland, the other one can't speak for Scotland, or they do represent a community, or they don't represent a community, and I think that has soured politics to a certain extent. And I also think, whether deliberate or inadvertently, I think it has sounded like, for large sections of the population, the politicians are saying, you're too stupid to understand this bit, or you're too racist to understand this bit, or you're too bigoted to understand this bit, and that has only further pushed certain communities further away from politics and fed that disenfranchisement. And so therefore I think allowing everyone to freely debate, as long as they are of course respectful, but freely debate and freely disagree, but then come to decisions that positively impact people's lives is going to be really, really important.
Okay. Thanks. Sarah.
As First Minister has said, as an organisation with its roots in the 1930s, which was about
it's another lady.
coming together across business, government, wider society to do something about the economic crisis that faced the country. I was delighted to be representing our wider membership, wider civil society. For me, the really positive takeaway from today was the richness of our civil society organisations, the commitment shown by our...
I mean, I'll scrap it there. I'll stop it there. It's just too much, you know. Just so arrogant, and basically you can't democratically vote reform. That's what they're basically saying. I would say SNP Labour, you all need to vote reform. I mean, if you look at women's rights and LGBTQ+, and you judge them by how Scotland's going to go and the countries around the world, I would say it looks as if it's the opposite of what you think of women's rights and that, you know, LGBTQ+, or whatever, and even the opposite of them. So you've got to even save them, I think. So vote reform, you know, especially if you live in a poor area of Scotland. SNP Labour voters, you need to switch immediately, you know. Do I like reform? No, I don't. Are they strong on this issue? No, they're not. It's an Overton window shift you've got to do. It's a protest vote. It's already becoming unacceptable. Their stances on this Labour, SNP and that are almost becoming unacceptable already to traditional Scots, traditional Brits, but there might not be enough of them and very soon to make any difference anyway, you know. So traditional Brits and that, because it's going to change. It's already changed irreversibly. Yeah, so I think you should listen to Douglas Carswell, Professor David Bates on this. I think that's his name, David Bates or David Bates from London, on this issue. Okay, that's enough for now. Goodbye.